Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's good to be back in my hometown. It's been a long time. And I'm honored to have a chance to share this special day with all of you. Before I begin my remarks, I want to express my gratitude to the American Legion Post 122 for allowing me to participate in today's program. You know, I spent a long time away from home, and I'll be honest with you, 42 years of military service, I wouldn't be standing before you here today if it wasn't for the people in this community who supported me and my family with encouragement, loving on my children when we would come home. And I just, again, I appreciate the Legion giving me this, allowing me to have this occasion to do something I wanted to do for a very long time, and that's simply to say thank you to all of you. This community has played a very important part in my life and ministry, and I look for every opportunity to have a chance to tell you just what you mean to me, and the legacy and the history that we share is just so important to my life and has really enriched my life. So again, God bless you. Thank you for your support. Over the years, I've had the occasion and the honor to orchestrate programs just like this one. And I know to achieve the desired outcome that you or the impact that you're trying to make requires a lot of planning and coordination and above all, teamwork. So therefore, I want to thank all of you who were involved in helping to make today a fitting tribute to our service members, to our veterans, and to their families. Your involvement clearly shows what most of us believe, that our country owes our veterans a debt that we can never fully repay. Still, we must continue to seek ways to honor their sacrifices and to express our gratitude for their service. Now, as I look around the room, and I had a chance to talk to many of you, I recognize that my fellow veterans, this is clearly your day. And because it is, I want to extend on behalf of everyone here my heartfelt gratitude for your service to this community and the country we love and cherish. Reflecting on your service, I realize that some of you sacrificed the vibrance of your youth, and those are the things that we remember, to this country and what it is today, a land of endless opportunity. By contrast, many others of you dedicated decades of service to ensure that peace and stability might prevail in parts of the world where those ideals were constantly being challenged. But no matter how long you serve, you and I can take pride in knowing that what we did in defense of each other and the way of life cherished by so many helped keep the American dream of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness alive and thriving for all Americans. All Americans. It's often said that the true strength of a community lies in the people who nurture it, upholding its values and traditions for future generations to learn from and build upon. I think you will agree that no other group embodies this spirit more than veterans and their families, whose unwavering commitment and sacrifices have shaped our communities and set a powerful example for our children and our grandchildren. So thank you once again, veterans. And if you would, I'd like for you and your family members to stand so we can recognize you. All of our veterans, your families, just stand so we can recognize you. Let's give them a round of applause. Again, thank you for your service. God bless you. You may be seated. Now, with that said, I want to take the next few minutes to talk about this special day, why it matters, how its legacy reflects our heritage, and why understanding this is crucial, especially at this moment in our nation's history. I like to do that by telling you a story about what it was like when I returned home from Vietnam. I came home in the early spring of 1971 when the landscape was bursting with the colors and the blooms of the season. I don't mind sharing that seeing such display was inspiring to me, giving me a sense of renewal and hope of moving beyond the hardship and the experiences of the previous year. I had left Vietnam just 3 days before. So some of you will understand when I say that my thoughts and emotions were still preoccupied with the sounds and the smells of war, mingled with the everyday life and scene that characterized Vietnam. But those feelings soon began to fade once I reached my family's farm, Blue Springs, and stepped through the doorway of my parents' home filled with people. They were family, neighbors, church members, people who had prayed for me and followed my progress in Vietnam through every letter home. Looking beyond the crowd, I could see that my mother's dining room table was covered with all the delicious foods I had enjoyed growing up. You can imagine, after a year of eating almost nothing but Army SEER rations, seeing such a spread was just like a dream come true. As most of you know, during the Vietnam War, such a homecoming was as good as it got. There were no grand parades or official ceremonies to welcome my generation home from Southeast Asia. But to be honest, most of us didn't care anyway. We were so young that all we wanted to do was to put the war behind us and get on with our lives. I will always be grateful for what my parents did for me and my older brother Fred, who had returned from Vietnam in the fall of 1969 to a similar homecoming. What I will always cherish about that moment is that it was genuine and spoke volumes about the love and support of an entire community. My reason for sharing that story is that it highlights a long-standing tradition in this region of the country that dates back to General Andrew Jackson's victory over the British at the Battle of New Orleans. A tradition that involves a community taking the time to recognize and support in some form or fashion the men and women of America's armed forces in times of peace and war. By the way, in case you didn't know this is how we Tennesseans earned the cherished nickname, the Volunteer State. When my good friend Susan Hinton asked me to come today and share my perspective on Veterans Day, my thoughts naturally drifted back to what it was like to grow up in this community. As a boy, the stories and folklore surrounding the American Civil War, or the war between the states as my family called it, were as much a part of my upbringing as anything else. Many of my ancestors fought in that war, and one was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions at the Battle of Mobile Bay in Alabama in early August 1864. Most people don't realize that Tennessee was sharply divided on the issue of secession, and for that reason DeKalb County offered up nearly as many troops to one side of the conflict as it did the other. Since Tennessee was a border state with key waterways that facilitated access to the deeper South, it weathered more battles during the conflict than any other state other than Virginia. As a result, the countryside was devastated, with large armies from both sides forging through major cities, small towns, and rural communities, taking what they needed and destroying the rest to deprive the other side of anything useful. By the end of 1865, the nation had lost more than 500,000 lives, leaving the American economy shattered and rural communities in turmoil. To the outside world, it seemed impossible that our free republic could ever recover from such a devastating ordeal. However, after only a few years, people began to do what they have always done in this country. They began reaching across the political divides to help families, neighbors, and communities begin to rebuild their lives. However, what truly set the country on the road to recovery and healing was what local communities, just like this one, began to do. They started looking for ways to honor the fallen, to account for the missing, and care for the grieving families they left behind. Thus, what began in Arlington, Virginia, as a local observance to honor fallen Union soldiers, eventually expanded to a nationwide movement known as Decoration Day, a day when families gather to place flowers on the graves of soldiers from both sides of the conflict. During those gatherings, people often shared a meal, which sparked meaningful conversations about the war, the people they had known and served with, the hardships that they had endured together, and the battles they had fought in and somehow survived. Over time, the entrenched barriers that many assumed would never be overcome gradually began to crumble, allowing the national spirit to be revived. The nation's progress in that regard was clearly evident by 1898 during the Spanish-American War, when Teddy Roosevelt formed a battalion of men the press dubbed as Roosevelt's Rough Riders. They say that these men were a remarkable and diverse group of volunteers who symbolized America's shift from a nation divided by internal strife to one truly united in vision of what the country should be. For instance, they were a mixture of men from all walks of life, North and South, rich and poor, black and white, Protestant and Catholic. In essence, they reflected what America had become, a nation where freedom depended on everyone doing their part. The main point of the story is that our country was maturing, and as a result, the way we honor those who protect the nation's interests at home and abroad was also evolving. For example, what local communities once called Decoration Day eventually became known as Memorial Day. Now, by the time I reached my teenage years, veterans from the Great War, as we called it back then, were in the mid-70s and early 80s. Not only that, but the impact of World War II and the Korean War was still keenly felt throughout the country, shaping the experiences and perspectives of an entire generation. My peers and I were very privileged to be raised amidst the legacy of some of the most influential figures of the 20th century, whose actions and sacrifice continue to inspire and define our understanding of patriotism and national identity. As a child, I treasured the time I spent with my grandparents because they were great storytellers, which usually began right after dinner. I vividly remember their discussion about Armistice Day, the 11th month, the 11th hour. In 1918, when the guns fell silent across the battle-worn landscape of Europe, marking the end of World War I and promising lasting peace in the world. I also recall my grandparents speaking with deep emotions when reflecting on the young men they knew from this community who'd either been killed in action or died from the disease. By contrast, they spoke with great excitement when recounting some of the exploits of such a man as Sergeant Alvin C. York from nearby Fentress County. As you know, Sergeant York returned from the war as one of the nation's most decorated heroes. In fact, to this day, he remains one of Tennessee's most important figures, ranking in status alongside notable figures such as Davy Crockett and President Andrew Jackson, better known as O'Hickory. Just like many beloved American traditions, people's perspective on historical events naturally evolve as circumstances change and society develops. In this same spirit, Armistice Day would eventually change to Veterans Day, when organizations such as the American Legion urged the U.S. Congress to officially recognize November 11th as a day to honor all veterans past and present. Like most teenagers, my grasp of history in the broader world was confined to the everyday interactions I observed between my parents and the people around them. Their conversations filled with anecdotes and opinions shaped my initial perception of the complexities of life beyond my family's Blue Spring farm. So my perspective of Veterans Day was limited, mostly by the movies I watched on TV on a Saturday afternoon. But all of that changed once veterans from the community began to visit local schools and share their story. I recall Tommy Harrell, for example, a lifelong friend and a Blue Springs neighbor, sharing how he had survived 3 torturous years as a prisoner of war of the Japanese in the Philippines. Then there was Joe Goodwin, who spent the final months of the war in Europe as a German prisoner of war, enduring harsh conditions and barely surviving on the brink of starvation. Many others came each year, which helped me to perceive military service and the harsh realities of war, not through the naive lens of youthfulness, but with a broader, more sobering context. Because of these veterans, I learned the harsh truths about military service. It involves loss, hardship, sacrifice, and endurance. Not only that, but combat leaves a lasting effect on individuals and their families who love and support them. Throughout my military career, spanning over 4 decades, people would often ask me where I was from. I've always taken pride in my Southern heritage, primarily because it provided me the spiritual foundation for my life and ministry as a Navy chaplain. So when people ask me about my background, I would sometimes respond by saying, I'm from Smithfield, a small town in Middle Tennessee where families are valued, friendships are nurtured, and neighbors are always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. These were the principles that were part of my everyday existence, and they were constantly on display in the way people interacted with one another and faced various challenges. From these remarkable individuals, most of whom were veterans, I learned the meaning of words like honesty, dependability, hard work, selflessness, compassion for others, and resilience. Values that not only kept me focused through both good and bad times, but also formed the foundation of my success as a leader. I have one last story and we're done. When I was 12 years old, I discovered an old cedar chest hidden away in my parents' attic. Inside, I found my father's Navy uniform, a book about the USS Intrepid, an Essex-class aircraft carrier in which he had served in the Pacific campaign, and several newspaper clippings detailing some of the major sea battles he had participated in. Until that moment, I didn't even know that my father was a veteran because he never talked about the war, not even with my mother. As I pored over this treasure trove of information, I discovered that my father had not only served with distinction, but he had also been present at every major sea battle from Midway to the end of the war in the Pacific. During this incredible period, he earned the Bronze Star Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon, and 5 battle stars on his service ribbon, testaments to the harsh reality of war he had endured. Reflecting on that experience, it struck me that every American veteran embodies a profound legacy. Each one carries stories of bravery and sacrifice that have not only shaped our nation's identity, but also defined the freedoms and values we often take for granted and will assume will always be there. From the Revolutionary War to our most recent conflicts in the Middle East and the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, veterans have always played a crucial role in linking our nation's past, present, and future. Their commitment ensures that the lessons learned from previous battles inform our current strategies, fostering a deeper understanding of the challenges we face as a nation. But ultimately, veterans serve as living reminders of the cost of liberty, bridging the generations with their stories of courage, sacrifice, and hope for a better tomorrow. To me, this is why Veterans Day matters, and why the legacy it represents must be passed from one generation to another. By honoring veterans, we not only recognize their contributions, but also inspire future generations to follow their example. The stories of sacrifice and courage continue to shape our nation's character and serve as a guiding light to what God has called us to be as a people and a nation. Thank you once again for the privilege of sharing this important day of remembrance and gratitude. May God's grace continue to shine upon our veterans and the brave men and women of America's armed forces, along with their families, who support them with unwavering strength, courage, and love. God bless you, and thank you.